Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Today we're going to be looking at
That's right.
reinforcement schedules.
Yes,
And this is something that
it's a big one.
can really change your approach as an ABA professional.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be breaking down some of the key terms and concepts
Yeah, for sure.
and bringing them to life with some real-world examples so that you can really start to see how
Real world stuff. Yeah,
you can use this in your ABA practice.
absolutely. Yeah.
We're going to be covering everything from continuous reinforcement to fixed and variable ratios and intervals, and even touch on how these concepts relate to things like biofeedback and managing challenging behaviors.
Yeah, we're going to hit all the good stuff.
So
Get ready.
get ready to unlock a powerful new tool in your ABA toolkit.
It's going to be great.
So,
It's amazing how often reinforcement schedules pop up in everyday life.
yeah.
They're not just some abstract ABA thing.
Oh.
They really are shaping behaviors all around us, from how we interact with our phones to how we train our pets.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's everywhere.
We hear a lot about reinforcement in ABA,
Mhm.
but I think it's helpful to take a step back
Yeah.
and really understand what we mean by a schedule of reinforcement.
Oh, yeah.
What are those rules of the game when it comes to delivering reinforcement?
Well, think of it like this.
Uh,
A schedule of reinforcement lays out exactly when and how a behavior will be reinforced.
okay.
It's like a recipe for how we're going to use reinforcement to shape behavior.
So it's not just about giving reinforcement.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
about being strategic with the timing and the delivery of that reinforcement.
Yeah, precisely.
Okay.
And the fascinating thing is
Mhm.
different schedules can create drastically different patterns of behavior.
Oh, interesting.
It's all about finding the right schedule for the right situation.
All right, so let's dive into some of those specific schedules.
Sounds good.
I know there are a few different types that are particularly important for ABA practitioners to understand.
Absolutely.
What are some of those?
We can start with the simplest one,
Okay.
continuous reinforcement.
Okay.
This is where every single instance of a target behavior is reinforced.
So let's say you're working with a child who is learning to raise their hand before speaking in class.
Right.
Every time they raise their hand,
Yeah,
you give them a sticker or verbal praise.
that's a great example.
Okay.
Continuous reinforcement is really effective for teaching brand new behaviors because it provides very clear feedback and consistent motivation.
But I imagine it wouldn't always be practical or sustainable to reinforce every single instance of a behavior,
Right.
especially in a busy classroom or therapy setting.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Yeah.
Continuous reinforcement isn't always feasible or necessary,
Okay.
and that's where intermittent schedules come in.
Oh.
These are where reinforcement is delivered only some of the time.
So it's like real life where we don't always get rewarded for everything we do,
Yeah, exactly.
but those rewards still keep us motivated in a way.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there are several types of intermittent schedules that are used in ABA,
Oh,
each with its own unique effects on behavior.
gotcha.
Let's start with ratio schedules,
Okay.
where reinforcement is all about the number of responses.
Okay, so it's about how much the behavior occurs.
Right. Let's imagine you have a client who is working on increasing their on-task behavior during independent work time. On a fixed ratio schedule, maybe they get a sticker for every 5 minutes of continuous on-task behavior.
So they know exactly how much effort is needed to get that reinforcement.
Yeah.
That's a very clear contingency.
Yes, and fixed ratio schedules often produce a pattern of responding that we call break and run.
Break and run.
You'll see a burst of effort to reach that reinforcement, followed by a little pause before the next burst.
Okay.
Think of it like a runner sprinting and then taking a short break.
I can see how that would apply to things like piecework.
Yes.
You get paid for every 10 items you assemble, so you work hard to get to that 10.
Right.
Take a breather and then repeat.
A perfect example.
Perfect.
Now,
Right.
let's shift gears to variable ratio schedules.
Variable ratio.
Here, reinforcement is still based on the number of responses,
Okay.
but it's less predictable. Variable ratio schedules often lead to high and steady rates of responding because the individual never knows exactly when the next reinforcement is coming.
Okay.
Think about those loot box systems in video games. People keep playing because they're driven by the possibility of getting that rare reward,
Right.
even if it takes a while.
It's like the element of surprise keeps things exciting and motivating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just video games.
Right.
This type of schedule pops up all over the place.
Okay.
It's the same principle behind slot machines.
Yeah.
You never know when that next win will hit, so you keep pulling the lever.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it also makes me think about how variable ratios can be tied to things like playing hard to get in dating.
Yes, exactly.
The unpredictable reinforcement of attention can really keep someone engaged.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how this one principle can explain so many different human behaviors.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Now, let's move on to the other major category.
Okay.
Interval schedules.
Okay, interval schedules.
These are all about the passage of time rather than the number of responses.
So instead of counting behaviors, we're looking at the clock.
Exactly.
Okay.
With a fixed interval schedule, reinforcement is given for the first response that occurs after a set amount of time has passed.
Okay.
Let's say the interval is 5 minutes. The individual could engage in the behavior 100 times during those 5 minutes, but they'll only get reinforced for the first response that happens after that 5-minute mark.
I'm picturing a student waiting for the bell to ring at the end of class.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many times they look at the clock, the bell will ring when it rings.
Exactly.
And that's when they can finally leave.
That's a perfect real-world example of a fixed interval schedule.
Perfect.
And because of that fixed time element, you often see a pattern of responding called scalloping with this type of schedule.
Scalloping.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Imagine a scallop shell.
Okay.
The response pattern kind of looks like that.
Okay.
You'll see a lull in behavior right after reinforcement is delivered.
Right.
And then the behavior gradually picks up as the interval progresses, reaching a peak right before the next reinforcement is available.
So it's like the anticipation builds as they get closer to that reinforcement window.
You got it.
Gotcha.
And finally, we have variable interval schedules,
Variable interval schedules.
where the amount of time that needs to pass before reinforcement is available varies.
Okay, so it's similar to the variable ratio schedule.
Right.
But with time instead of responses.
Exactly.
So instead of getting reinforced after a fixed 5 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe it's 3 minutes one time,
Right.
then 7, then 4.
Yeah.
It's unpredictable.
Precisely. And just like variable ratio schedules,
Mm-hmm.
this unpredictability creates a steady rate of responding
Okay.
because the individual never knows exactly when that reinforcement opportunity will arise.
So if a supervisor checks in on their employees' work at random times throughout the day,
Mm-hmm.
the employees are more likely to stay on task because they don't know when that check-in might happen.
That's a great example of how variable interval schedules can be applied in a workplace setting.
That's a good one.
And because these schedules produce such consistent and predictable behavior patterns,
All right.
they're often used as a baseline in research.
That makes sense. You need a stable baseline to accurately compare the effects of different interventions or variables.
Right.
So let me see if I've got this straight.
Okay.
We have 4 main types of schedules:
Yes.
fixed ratio, variable ratio,
Mm-hmm.
fixed interval, and variable interval.
That's right.
Each one has its own unique way of shaping behavior based on either the number of responses or the passage of time.
You've got it.
Okay, cool.
And for ABA professionals, understanding these different schedules is like having a toolkit for shaping behavior change.
Okay.
By choosing the right schedule for the right situation.
Mm-hmm.
You can influence how quickly a behavior is learned,
Right.
how consistently it occurs,
Okay.
and how resistant it is to extinction.
Wow, that's so powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And I'm already starting to see how this knowledge can be applied to so many different areas of ABA practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on,
Okay.
I think it's worth briefly touching on a fascinating distinction within the realm of reinforcement schedules. The concept of molecular versus molar accounts of schedule performance.
Ooh, sounds intriguing, but maybe a bit more technical.
Okay, yeah.
Can you break it down for me?
Sure. Think of it like this.
All right.
Molecular accounts focus on the very fine-grained details of how behavior is shaped by schedules.
Okay.
They look at those moment-to-moment relationships between a response and the reinforcement that follows.
So it's about zooming in and understanding those very specific contingencies.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, molar accounts take a step back and look at the bigger picture,
Okay.
the overall patterns of behavior that emerge over a longer period.
So while molecular accounts are focused on the individual trees,
Yes.
molar accounts are looking at the entire forest.
A perfect analogy.
I like that.
And both perspectives are valuable for ABA professionals.
Oh,
By
fine.
considering both the fine-grained details and the overall patterns,
Right.
we can gain a deeper understanding of how schedules of reinforcement are influencing behavior.
This is all incredibly insightful.
Yeah. I'm always curious about how these concepts play out in the real world.
Sure.
What are some examples of how an understanding of schedules can be directly applied in ABA practice?
Great question.
Okay.
One area where this knowledge is incredibly valuable is in managing challenging behaviors.
Okay, that's definitely a topic that many ABA professionals face in their work.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember that challenging behaviors, like any other behaviors,
Right.
are learned and maintained by reinforcement.
Okay.
If we understand the specific schedules of reinforcement that are keeping a challenging behavior going,
Right.
we can start to change the game.
So if a child is throwing tantrums to get attention,
Yes.
the attention they receive, even if it's negative,
Right.
is acting as reinforcement.
Exactly.
And that's what's keeping the behavior going.
Exactly.
Whoa.
By identifying the schedule of reinforcement.
Okay.
In this case, maybe it's an unintentional variable ratio schedule where the child gets attention after a random number of tantrums.
We can start to manipulate that schedule to decrease the tantrums and increase more appropriate behaviors.
So we might implement a strategy where we give the child lots of positive attention when they're behaving appropriately,
Right.
but completely ignore the tantrums.
Precisely.
Wow.
By changing the schedule of reinforcement, we're changing the consequences that are driving the behavior,
Okay.
but it's not always as simple as ignoring a behavior.
Right.
Sometimes we need to think about how we can gradually shift the schedule of reinforcement to achieve long-lasting behavior change.
Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
Are there any other techniques that leverage our knowledge of schedules to manage challenging behaviors?
Absolutely.
What are some of those?
One common approach is called a thinning procedure.
Thinning.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay.
What does that involve?
Think of it like weaning someone off a constant stream of rewards.
Okay.
Thinning is the process of gradually reducing the frequency of reinforcement.
So let's say you've been reinforcing a behavior every single time it happens. That's a continuous schedule.
Right.
With thinning,
Yes.
you might start reinforcing it every other time,
Exactly.
then every third time, and so on.
You got it.
So it's like slowly stretching out the intervals between reinforcement,
Yeah.
moving them toward a more intermittent schedule.
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And why is this beneficial?
Yeah, why is that?
Well, remember how we talked about how behaviors maintained on intermittent schedules tend to be more resistant to extinction?
Right. It's like they're used to working for that reinforcement.
Yeah.
So they're more likely to keep going, even when it's not delivered every single time.
Precisely.
Oh, got it.
Thinning is a powerful tool for building independence and promoting long-term behavior change.
Like we're building up the individual's resilience so they're not so dependent on constant reinforcement.
Great way to put it.
Okay, cool.
Now,
Shall we-
before we move on,
Okay.
I want to touch on another fascinating application of schedules of reinforcement.
All right.
The concept of reinforcement efficacy
Yeah.
and how we can use something called progressive ratio schedules to study it.
You mentioned progressive ratio schedules earlier.
I did.
I'm ready to dig into those.
All right.
What exactly are they?
Remember how we talked about those fixed ratio schedules where reinforcement is delivered after a certain number of responses?
Right.
Well, a progressive ratio schedule takes that a step further.
Yeah.
The amount of effort required to get that reinforcement keeps increasing.
So it's like that classic rat pressing a lever for food.
Yes.
But now the rat has to press the lever twice to get the food, then 3 times, then 5, and so on.
That's a perfect example.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that we can use this type of schedule to figure out just how powerful a particular reinforcer is for an individual.
How do we do that?
We look for the breaking point.
The breaking point.
Eventually, the individual will reach a point where they're no longer willing to put in the effort required to get the reinforcement.
Oh.
The higher the breaking point.
The more motivating the reinforcer.
So if they're willing to work really hard to get something,
Yeah.
we can assume that reinforcer is highly valuable to them.
Exactly. And this knowledge can be incredibly valuable for ABA professionals.
Yeah, it can help us choose reinforcers that are truly meaningful and effective for each individual, taking the guesswork out of the equation.
Precisely.
Okay.
And not only can we identify powerful reinforcers, but we can also use progressive ratio schedules to compare the relative effectiveness of different reinforcers.
So we might find that one client is highly motivated by social praise, while another client is more driven by tangible rewards like toys or stickers.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that knowledge can be incredibly helpful when designing intervention plans.
It sounds like progressive ratio schedules aren't just some theoretical concept.
Right.
They're a practical tool that can inform our clinical decision-making.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
They allow us to gather data on what truly motivates our clients.
Which can make a huge difference in the effectiveness of our interventions.
It's like we're personalizing our approach based on the individual's unique needs and preferences.
Precisely.
Awesome.
Now,
Okay.
speaking of research, progressive ratio schedules have also been used to study how things like drugs and food can act as powerful reinforcers.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, researchers have found that individuals who are prone to addiction or overeating tend to have much higher breaking points on progressive ratio schedules when the reinforcer is a drug or food.
So they're willing to put in a lot more effort to get that fix, even when the effort required keeps increasing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this suggests that those substances have a higher reinforcing value for these individuals,
Right.
which aligns with what we know about the nature of addiction and the powerful effects of highly palatable foods.
This is really eye-opening.
It is.
How can ABA professionals use these findings to guide their work with clients?
Well, these studies highlight the importance of understanding the potential reinforcing effects of certain substances and foods.
Right.
For example,
Yeah.
if we're working with a client who has a history of substance abuse,
Mm,
we might want to be cautious about using food as a reinforcer.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
We don't want to inadvertently trigger cravings or reinforce unhealthy behaviors.
exactly.
Right.
It's all about being mindful of the individual's vulnerabilities and tailoring our interventions accordingly.
So it's about recognizing that not all reinforcers are created equal.
Right.
And some individuals might be more sensitive to the reinforcing effects of certain substances than others.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
And by understanding these nuances, we can develop more effective and individualized treatment plans.
It's like we're personalizing our approach based on the individual's unique needs and vulnerabilities.
Precisely.
Awesome.
And that's what ethical and effective ABA practice is all about.
This has been such an incredible deep dive so far.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's amazing how much depth there is to this concept of schedules of reinforcement.
It really is one of those foundational principles in ABA that has far-reaching implications.
Yeah.
And we've only just begun to explore its complexities.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's pretty amazing.
it is.
I'm
Yeah,
excited to continue this deep dive.
that's right.
Now, I'm curious to hear more about how we can apply this knowledge of reinforcement schedules to the specific challenges that ABA professionals often encounter.
Sure,
We touched on managing challenging behaviors earlier.
we did.
Can we dive a little deeper into that?
Absolutely. Remember, challenging behaviors, just like any other behaviors, are learned and maintained by reinforcement.
Okay.
So if we want to change those behaviors, we need to get strategic about how we're using reinforcement.
It's like we're playing a game of chess with behavior.
Okay.
We need to understand the opponent's moves in this case, their reinforcement contingencies that are driving the behavior,
I see.
so we can make our own strategic counter moves.
I love that analogy.
And one of our most powerful tools in this game is something called differential reinforcement.
Yes.
Okay, I've heard that term before.
Okay.
But can you remind me what it means?
Essentially, differential reinforcement is about being selective with the behaviors we reinforce.
Oh.
We want to reinforce those behaviors that we want to see more of,
Right.
while putting other, less desirable behaviors on extinction.
So if we're working with a child who often shouts out answers in class, instead of raising their hand, we might use differential reinforcement by praising them enthusiastically every time they raise their hand, while ignoring or redirecting them when they shout out.
That's a great example.
Okay.
By consistently reinforcing the desired behavior, raising their hand, and withholding reinforcement for the undesired behavior, shouting out, we're essentially changing the rules of the game, making it more likely that the child will choose the behavior that gets them what they want.
It's like we're shifting the balance of power in favor of the behaviors we want to see.
Exactly.
And it makes me think of how important it is to be really clear about what behaviors we're reinforcing and which ones we're not.
Yeah.
Consistency is key.
You're absolutely right. We need to be very intentional and consistent with our reinforcement if we want to see real change.
Definitely.
And speaking of consistency, another important technique for managing challenging behaviors and promoting lasting behavior change in general is something called thinning.
Thinning. Okay.
The idea is to slowly shift the individual from a continuous reinforcement schedule to a more intermittent schedule.
And why is that beneficial?
Well, remember how we discussed that behaviors maintained on intermittent schedules tend to be more resistant to extinction?
Right. It's like they're used to working for those rewards, so they're more likely to persist even when those rewards aren't as frequent or predictable.
That's it. Thinning is a powerful technique for building independence and promoting long-term behavior change.
Right.
It's like we're helping the individual develop intrinsic motivation rather than relying solely on external rewards.
It makes me think of how we teach children to ride a bike.
Okay.
At first, we might hold onto the seat and run alongside them, providing constant support and reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But as they get better, we gradually let go, offering less and less assistance until they're riding on their own.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
And it illustrates the importance of gradually fading our support as the individual becomes more competent.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier,
Okay.
the fascinating concept of transition states.
Yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned how these periods of adjustment can be challenging when reinforcement schedules change. Can you elaborate on what those are and why they're so important for ABA professionals to understand?
Absolutely. Transition states are essentially those bumps in the road that we encounter when the rules of the game change, when we shift from one reinforcement schedule to another.
Okay.
These transitions can be tricky
Right.
because they often involve a disruption in those established patterns of behavior that we've worked so hard to create.
So if a child is used to getting a sticker for every math problem they complete,
Yes.
and then we suddenly switch to a system where they get a sticker for every 5 problems,
Right.
they might experience some frustration or confusion.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that can lead to a temporary increase in challenging behaviors
Right.
or a decrease in the desired behavior.
Gotcha.
It's like the individual is trying to figure out the new rules
Yeah.
and adjust their strategy accordingly.
It makes me think of those moments when you're driving and you hit a detour.
Oh, yeah?
You have to reroute,
Mm-hmm.
which can be frustrating and time-consuming. But ultimately, you'll reach your destination.
That's a great way to think about it.
And just like with detours,
Yeah.
our role as ABA professionals is to anticipate those transitions,
Mm-hmm.
provide clear guidance and support,
Right.
and help the individual navigate those bumps in the road as smoothly as possible.
Yes, exactly.
So how can we do that? What are some practical strategies for supporting individuals through these transition states?
One of the most important things is to be proactive.
Okay.
We need to anticipate those changes in reinforcement schedules
Okay.
and prepare the individual for what's coming.
So if we're planning to thin the reinforcement schedule, we might start by giving the individual a heads up,
Mm-hmm.
explaining that things are going to change a bit,
Right.
but that we're confident they can handle it.
Exactly.
Okay.
We might even use visual supports,
Okay.
like a schedule or a token board, to help them understand the new expectations.
Yeah.
It's like giving them a roadmap for the transition.
It's like when a teacher introduces a new classroom routine.
Yes.
They don't just spring it on the students.
Right.
They explain it clearly, model it, and provide opportunities for practice.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
And by taking these steps,
Mm-hmm.
we can help minimize the disruption and frustration that often accompany changes in reinforcement schedules.
Right. Makes sense. Got that.
Now, I want to touch on a few real-life examples of transition states
Okay.
that ABA professionals might encounter in their work.
Right.
One common transition that we often see
Yeah.
is the shift from childhood to adolescence.
Right. That's a time of huge developmental changes. And I can imagine that the reinforcement systems that worked well during childhood might need some adjustments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As children move into adolescence,
Right.
their social world expands, their interests evolve,
Yeah.
and their need for independence grows.
That's right.
And with those changes come shifts in the types of reinforcers that are most effective
Right.
and the schedules that are most appropriate.
So a teenager might not be as motivated by a sticker chart
Right.
as they were when they were younger.
Exactly.
They might be more driven by social recognition, privileges, or access to preferred activities.
You're right.
Okay.
And this is where our understanding of reinforcement schedules becomes so important.
Yeah.
We need to adapt our approach to align with those developmental changes.
Right.
We might need to shift to more intermittent schedules,
Mm-hmm.
introduce new types of reinforcers,
Okay.
and help teenagers develop strategies for self-management and delayed gratification.
It's like we're helping them learn how to navigate a world where reinforcement isn't always immediate or guaranteed.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And it's not just about adolescence.
Right.
Another major transition state that can be particularly challenging is retirement.
I can see how that would be a big adjustment.
Yeah.
Retirement often involves a significant shift in daily routines and social interactions,
Yeah.
which can impact the reinforcement schedules that individuals are accustomed to.
Absolutely. Work provides a structured schedule,
Right.
a sense of purpose, and opportunities for social interaction and recognition.
Makes sense.
When people retire,
Yeah.
they often experience a sudden decrease in those sources of reinforcement,
Right.
which can lead to feelings of boredom, isolation, or even depression.
So how can we use our knowledge of ABA to support individuals through this transition and help them find new sources of reinforcement and fulfillment?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to help individuals develop new routines and activities
Okay.
that provide a sense of purpose and enjoyment.
Right.
This might involve exploring hobbies, volunteering in the community,
Okay.
or spending more time with loved ones.
It's about helping them create a new and rewarding reinforcement schedule for this new chapter in their lives.
Exactly. And just like with any other transition state,
Right.
it's crucial to be patient, supportive, and understanding.
Of course.
Change takes time.
Yeah.
And it's okay to experience some bumps along the way.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating topic.
Yeah, me too.
But even in this short time, I've gained so many valuable insights that I can apply in my own work as an ABU professional.
No, me too. And it's a reminder that we never stop learning and growing in this field.
Right.
There's always more to discover and explore when it comes to the science of behavior.
Before we wrap up this part of our discussion,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
Okay, go for it.
As you go about your day today, I encourage you to put on your behavior analyst glasses and look for the reinforcement schedules that are operating all around you. Notice how those schedules are influencing the behaviors of yourself, your clients, your colleagues, and even those you encounter in your daily life.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much we can learn about human behavior simply by paying attention to these subtle but powerful forces.
It is.
And remember,
Okay.
with a little bit of knowledge and creativity,
Yeah.
we can use those forces for good,
Right.
shaping behavior in positive and meaningful ways.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And for this last part of our deep dive, I want to zoom out a little bit
Okay.
and look at the bigger picture of how reinforcement schedules shape our lives.
Okay. What do you mean by the bigger picture?
Well, we've talked a lot about how reinforcement schedules work in, specific situations,
Right.
like in a therapy session or a classroom. But these principles are constantly at play in our everyday lives.
Oh, yeah. Shaping our habits, our relationships, our careers, pretty much everything we do.
That's so true. We're constantly responding to different reinforcement contingencies, whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. Think about like your morning routine.
Okay.
What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Hmm.
Is it the reinforcement of a delicious cup of coffee?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe it's the avoidance of being late for work.
For me, it's definitely the coffee.
Okay.
That first sip is like my reward.
There you have it. A perfect example of a reinforcement schedule shaping your behavior.
It is.
And it's not just our personal lives.
Right.
These principles are also at work in our social interactions, our relationships.
So how we interact with our friends, our family, our romantic partners is also influenced by these reinforcement schedules.
Absolutely. Think about how we learn to navigate social situations.
Okay.
We receive positive reinforcement when we engage in behaviors that are socially appropriate and rewarding.
Okay. Yeah.
Like being a good listener.
Offering compliments?
Yeah.
Or being helpful?
Being kind?
Yes, exactly. And those experiences really shape how we interact with others in the future.
That makes sense. And I imagine the same principles apply to romantic relationships as well.
Absolutely.
We're attracted to people who provide us with positive reinforcement,
Yes.
whether it's attention or affection, validation, a sense of humor.
Exactly. And those relationships thrive when there's a balance of reinforcement between partners.
Oh, interesting.
And this brings us to a really important point. Healthy relationships, whether they're friendships, romantic partnerships, or family relationships, are often characterized by a pattern of reciprocal reinforcement.
Reciprocal reinforcement.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way street where both people are providing each other with positive reinforcement.
Exactly. It's about giving and receiving, supporting and being supported.
Mm-hmm.
When those reinforcement contingencies are balanced and mutually beneficial, relationships tend to be stronger and more fulfilling.
That's a beautiful way to think of it. It's like a dance.
I love that.
Where both partners are leading and following at times.
Yes.
Creating kind of a harmonious flow of positive interactions.
I love that image. And this concept of reciprocal reinforcement really extends beyond our personal relationships as well. It's crucial in the workplace, too.
So how does that play out in a professional setting?
Well, think about the relationship between an employee and their supervisor.
Okay.
A good supervisor will provide positive reinforcement for their employees' hard work,
Right.
dedication, and achievements.
Of course.
This might involve things like praise, recognition, opportunities for growth, or even tangible rewards.
Like bonuses or promotions.
Exactly. And in turn, motivated and engaged employees are going to contribute more to the team.
And that's going to lead to greater productivity.
Yes.
And success for the organization.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation.
It is.
When those reinforcement contingencies are aligned. But it's not just about the relationship between employees and supervisors. Reciprocal reinforcement is also essential for creating a positive and collaborative team culture.
So it's about fostering an environment where colleagues support each other,
Yes.
celebrate each other's successes, provide constructive feedback.
Exactly. When teams have a strong foundation of reciprocal reinforcement, they're more likely to be productive, innovative, and resilient in the face of challenges.
This is all so fascinating. It's amazing to see how these principles of reinforcement, which might seem pretty simple at first glance, actually weave such a complex tapestry throughout our lives.
They do. And the more we understand these principles, the more empowered we become to shape our own experiences.
Right.
And create positive change in the world around us.
That's a powerful message to end on.
It is.
As we wrap up this deep dive on reinforcement schedules, I want to encourage our listeners to continue this exploration in their own lives. Pay attention to those reinforcement contingencies that are at play in your relationships, your work, your hobbies, everywhere. And think about how you can use this knowledge to create a more positive and rewarding experience for yourself and those around you. Because when it comes to behavior, understanding reinforcement schedules is like having the keys to the kingdom.
Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of reinforcement schedules. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep shaping behavior for the better.